Welcome to Chapter 3. Mrs. Roth here, and I've got some notes for you on perception. So this first page is an overview of the chapter. I'll just read the first paragraph to you here. If a tree falls in the woods, does it make a sound? Well, that may depend on where you're standing. The idea that two people can experience the exact same thing, yet view the experience differently, is proof that we all have different perceptions of the world around us. When applying this fact to communication, it means that people may communicate differently about truth, reality, and the world that we perceive differently. This chapter will help you gain an understanding of this concept, why it happens, and how you can speak effectively about your unique perception to others. Some questions that you should consider as we go through this chapter. How do you view yourself as a communicator? How is your view of reality unique or different from other people? What impacts your perception? How can you explain your perception to others? And some of the important concepts that we're going to cover is the definition of perception, the study of the Johari window, self-analysis, and overview of concepts related to perception. And by the time we're done with this chapter, you should be able to explain your own perception to others and explain how your perception impacts communication. So that's a little overview of Chapter 3. I've got some notes here for you today, but first, just for a little bit of fun, do you remember doing these hidden objects? So this one is pulled from like a kid's highlight magazine, and you're supposed to find these things on the bottom. So like this wind chime. Can you find the wind chime here? The wind chime is right up here. All right, now it gets harder the more stuff you have going on in the background. So can you find the rhino in this one? Your tip is that the rhino is blue. Can you find the rhino? Bottom right. Oh, right here. Now, why is it difficult to pick out these objects in these hidden word searches? Well, because there's a lot of things going on, and it depends what you're paying attention to, right? So that's one of the things we'll talk about today when we get to perception. All right, so first we're going to start out with the definition of perception, and you want to have your notes guides so you can be filling this out as we go. All right, so either on Notability or you can have a paper copy of it too. So the first thing that you want to do is define perception. Perception is the way a person sees the world, and it's the process by which you filter and interpret what your senses tell you so you can create a meaningful picture of the world. I think the most important part is that first part of the definition. It's the way a person sees the world and the process by which you filter things. Okay, so it's how you see the world and the process which you come to that conclusion. The perception process is 2 steps. Step 1 is something affects your senses. So if you think of the communication process chart that we did in Chapter 2, we talked about having those channels of communication where you can send and receive messages through sight and sound and smell and taste and touch. This is where the perception process starts. You get something coming in through your senses, and then number 2, you have to decode that sensation. So you're like, oh, I smell something. Does this smell like cookies? Oh, is someone baking fresh cookies? Oh, that sounds good. I'm hungry, right? So your brain kind of goes through that process of trying to figure out what the thing is that has impacted your senses, and then also trying to figure out what that means. So for you, like, oh, I'm going to get to eat fresh cookies. So that's the 2 steps of the perception process. This is kind of a fun YouTube clip. You try to guess the secret sound, and I won't go through it here, but you can find the link in the notes if you want to do this for fun. It's practicing the perception process, right? So you can't see something, you hear a noise, and you try to guess what that noise is. That's example of the perception process. So why do people perceive things differently, right? If you hear a noise, right, and you're trying to guess what that noise is, why doesn't everybody have the same guess? Why do people perceive it differently? Well, there's 5 main reasons that people perceive things differently. And they could be things just like guessing a secret sound, or it could be big, heavy, value-orientated issues in our world today. But there's 5 reasons that are kind of the core of differences in perception. Okay, reason number one. And on your note guide, what you're going to be doing here is filling in this bold part, physical differences. You do not have to copy all of these bullet points in. You can copy a little bit of the information in if it helps you remember, but just required is this big part here, physical differences. So that's the first reason people perceive things differently. Eyes, ears, nose, they don't all work the same. That's a physical thing. It's a physiological thing, right? From chapter 2, do you remember talking about physiological interference? Well, physiological things can impact perception. So for example, I wear contacts, and if I did not have my contacts in, if you asked me to read something from far away, I wouldn't be able to do it. But the person next to me, they probably would, right? So our eyes work differently. Sometimes there's other physical things involved. So like if we were both witnesses to a crime, but I was closer and you were far away and your view was obstructed and you had some external interference, right? I might perceive things differently because I had like a firsthand seat, like I was much closer. The physical space was less. So physical differences is number one, anything physical. Number two is differences in past experiences and background. So this really is getting at the effect that what has happened in your history really impacts you today. Because people rely upon their history and their past experiences to create their current perceptions. So this is an idea that everybody is kind of a sum of their total life experiences, right? So for example, if you grow up living in Minnesota and people around you support the Minnesota Twins, then maybe you will also support the Minnesota Twins, right? Because that's something that's been in your past experience or it's been in your background. So that's number two. Number three is differences in present feelings or circumstances. So it depends the current mood that you're in. So for example, I'm not really a morning person. And if you ask me about something early in the morning before I've had my coffee, I might be kind of cranky and I might be less enthusiastic. But if you ask me later in the day, right, when I'm like in a better mood, well, then maybe I'd like it better. I'd be more willing to do something, or I'd feel differently. I'd perceive your request differently, right? So perception can vary. It's not like you see something in one way, and no matter what, you always see it in that way. It can change. It can change throughout the day, from time to time, from day to day. And however you're feeling at that current moment, that's like a big deal. Okay, so that's reason number three, differences in present feelings or circumstances. Reason number four is differences in using information. This one kind of gets back to like that hidden object example. So if you think about at any current moment, you have so much sensory information going on around you that you can't pay attention to everything. So right now, like even in this room, I have the feeling of the chair that I'm sitting on. I have the sound of the vent. I have the posters on the wall, right? I have the sound of someone walking by in the hallway. And I can't pay attention to everything, so I choose what I pay attention to. That's like that hidden object. There's so many pictures of random things all Mod Podge together, you can't look at them all and process them all at the same time. You have to try to figure out, where is the rhino? Where is the wind chime? Ignore the sunglasses, right? And it's what you're paying attention to at any given moment. So that's differences in using information. Reason number five is differences in expectations. So this is kind of like what you expect is more likely what you're going to get. So if you're going to a brand new movie and someone tells you, like, this is the best movie ever, it's won a ton of awards, the acting is awesome, the sound is great, you know, the music, the soundtrack is amazing, you're going to love this movie. Well, when you're in the movie watching it, you're going to be looking for all of those good, fantastic, fabulous things, and you're more likely to see those good, fantastic, fabulous things and more likely to enjoy the movie. Now, vice versa, if someone tells you, oh man, this movie is trash, I mean, go ahead and sit through it if you want, but wow, there's terrible editing and the acting is awful, and you know, I can't believe that they spent this much money putting it on the big screen. And then you go watch that movie. It could be the same movie, But you're looking for the poor editing, and you're looking for the bad lighting, and you're looking for those negative things. You're more likely to see the negative things, and you're more likely to think it's a bad movie. Now, if somebody doesn't say anything, they just say, oh, you're watching a movie, enjoy, right? Or, oh, you're watching a movie, okay. And then you have no expectations. Well, then it's less likely to influence the way you feel or see that movie. Okay, so that's reason number 5, differences in expectations. Now, here is an example of an illustration that was created to kind of be a perception trick. So when you're looking at this, what do you see? There should be 2 different images that you can see here in this picture. The first one, if you focus on the black part of the picture, you should see a guy playing like a saxophone here, right? So he's got his hair up here, he's got his nose here. This is his musical instrument. This is his feet down the bottom. Or if you focus the white part of the picture, you're going to see a woman's face. So this is her eye, this is her nose, this is her chin, right? As kind of the silhouette shadow of a woman's face. So it depends if you're paying attention to the black or if you're paying attention to the white. So there's some things that because of the way perception works and our brain works, there's people who can kind of make brain tricks to play on that, right? Things that look 3D or hidden object searches, or people will like on purpose play on the perceptions of our brain. But sometimes this perception comes into play every day when people aren't even trying to play on it. So sometimes here's some examples of things that might come up in daily life. Are you a Vikings fan or are you a Green Bay Packers fan? All right. Well, did you grow up in Minnesota or did you grow up in Wisconsin? That could influence things, right? How about Caribou or Starbucks? Well, do your friends like Caribou or do your friends like Starbucks? Did your mom buy you Starbucks? Did your mom buy you Caribou? Your past experiences could impact that. How about people feeling about masks? Should everybody wear masks? Should we not wear masks? What should Governor Walz do? Should he open up the state of Minnesota? Should he close it more down? Well, your feelings on that, it's your perception of COVID-19, right? Or even the Confederate flag. This is an issue that's kind of like a national issue at the moment. And even a few years back, there was like a lot of questions that came up around the Confederate flag here at South. Some people see it as a sign of independence or rebellion or heritage, right? Something positive. Other people see it as a sign of oppression and slavery and racism, right? And so you've got 2 people viewing it positive or negative. And I would say that society's impression or perception of the Confederate flag, maybe when it started way back when, was more positive, then became more divisive. And currently, more people are seeing it as a racist symbol, and it's being removed in more and more places, right? So perception of an issue can be collective also. Okay, so again, it gets back to these 5 different reasons. Physical differences, right? If you're black or if you're white, maybe you see the Confederate flag differently. Number 2, differences in past experiences and backgrounds. So have you attended Super Bowl parties in the past where you've cheered for the Green Bay Packers and now that impacts you and you are trying to cheer for them again in the future? Number 3, differences in present feelings or circumstances. Maybe you are tired in the morning and you need caffeine and you don't even care if it's Starbucks or Caribou, whatever one's easiest, whatever one's closest to your house, right? Differences in using information. There's a lot going on at once. How can you pay attention to everything, right? And number 5, differences in expectations. And that's kind of where you, for whatever reason, believe a certain thing and you'll be less likely to have your mind changed. Okay, so it gets back to those 5 reasons. Here's another little video you can watch if you're interested. I think it's kind of entertaining. It focuses on a contestant who's in a dark black room and he has to try to guess what 3 objects are without using his sight. Okay, so you take away the channel of sight and you have to rely on the other channels to perceive what something is, and it can be kind of funny. And I think it demonstrates those 5 different things that we talked about. Another term that you need to know is selective perception. This is not only do those 5 things impact how you perceive, but also this idea of selective perception means you get some choice. You get some choice in what you choose to pay attention to. Okay, so let's say you're having class and your teacher's giving you notes, but really you've got like a notification on your phone that popped up and you got a snap message from that hottie bo body and you like want to pay attention to that. Or you know there is like an intense game of Among Us and you would rather be paying attention to your phone, playing this game than listening to your teacher. Well, you have a choice, right? So you have a choice what you pay attention to. You have a choice on what details you focus on. You have a choice on if you want to see something positively or negatively, right? You have a choice. And that's what selective perception is about. When you can't pay attention to all the details and you choose which ones to pay attention to. All right, so the definition there is paying attention to what you want to and ignoring everything else. Okay. Notes, guide, continuing. Oh, here's a good awareness test that can test your selective perception, which is kind of fun too. So you can click on that link if you want. What do we tend to notice? So selective perception, what do we tend to pay attention to? Because there's a lot of choices out there, people. Well, here's your thing. There's four reasons that you choose to pay attention to something. Number one is if it's unusual, if it's a very strange. So you're in your classroom, your teacher's teaching notes, and somebody knocks on the door and it's Anita. But Anita is in a 1980s prom dress. That would be odd, right? You probably would stop paying attention. I would probably stop teaching the lesson and would be like, Anita, why are you dressed for prom, right? So if something is really strange, that will catch your attention. Number two, if something is repetitive, and that's oftentimes while you'll see the same advertisements repeated more than once, right? So if something is repeated, it will catch your attention. If there's flyers in the hallway, you're more likely to notice it if you've walked by the same flyer 3 times. If something is intense, number three, that's the concept behind a fire alarm. They make it so loud and shrill that it's hard to kind of carry on with class like normal, right? It's so intensely loud that you have to pay attention to it. And then the last one is what's in tune with our own needs. So if you are really hungry, you are going to notice things about food. You're going to notice your classmate who has a snack. You're going to notice the advertisement for McDonald's. You're going to notice the clock and how close it is to lunch, right? So whatever's in tune with your current needs, you'll tend to notice that more. All right, a little bit left here, hang in. Okay, halo effect, next up. Halo effect is the definition of assuming a whole set of positive characteristics when you've only observed one. So this halo effect is when you have a positive spin on things. I always think about this as like maybe when you're first crushing on somebody and you're really interested in them, right? You see one positive thing, like they're cute, and then you assume a whole bunch of other positive things too. Like I bet they're fun to hang out with, and I bet they're really nice, and I bet, right? And it seems really positive. And this can happen like in class, like you show up on time and you say good morning to your teacher and they're like, oh, I bet they're a really nice student, right? So you can kind of, it's putting out a good first impression. It's a halo effect. One positive thing is connected to a whole bunch of other positive assumptions. The same thing, but opposite, is the horn effect, when there can be one negative thing, right? And that's connected to a whole bunch of negative characteristics. So a student shows up tardy to class and a teacher's like, oh man, I bet this student is not going to have a good semester. Now, as teachers, we try hard to control our perceptions and not, jump into that frame of thought. But, you want to set a good impression. If you do something negative, sometimes people are going to assume other negative things connected to that, right? So the definition of the horn effect is assuming a whole set of negative characteristics and you've only assumed one. Both halo and both horn effect aren't necessarily accurate, right? It's kind of where you can fall into stereotypes. And just like in chapter 2, where we talked about levels of information, it's similar that you want to, the more information, the more you can increase your background experience and knowledge, the more accurate your perceptions are. But halo and horn effect do come into play. Another term you want to know here is personal perception. This is just the term that we use to explain our vision of the world or our current reality. So if I believe something strongly and you believe something different, we can have a conversation about it by referencing it as my personal perception. Well, the way I personally perceive this issue is, right, blah, blah, blah. And you would say, oh, well, from my personal perception point, I believe blah, 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 right? And we can have a conversation, and it will likely involve the 5 things we talked about earlier, because that's what impacts our personal perception. Now, a lot of times personal perception can cause conflict, and personal perception can really start these conversations that are heavy and difficult. Now, these conversations also relate to culture, right, and how you were raised. It can also relate to conflict, which is a concept that we study in Chapter 8. So there's a whole bunches of pieces in terms of communication tied together, right? But you start off by understanding you view the world a different way. That doesn't mean everybody has to view it the same way. And what you want to try to do is, even if you don't agree with that other person, you want to try to understand where they're coming from, and to say, okay, I acknowledge your point of view. I acknowledge your perception, but it's different than mine. Okay, so you don't want to try to force everyone to assimilate with your perception. Instead, you want to understand everybody has a different perception. And sometimes, right, you use that 2 different views of reality to have a conversation about a topic. And connected to that conversation then would be feed forward. Feed forward is the technical name for what you do to try to get more information about somebody else's perception. So it's a statement where you're getting information. And an example would be something like, well, let me see if I understand. Can you tell me more about X? Does that mean that you believe Y, right? So it's kind of like trying to draw out information from the person that you're talking to so that you can understand their point of view better. Okay, and that, my friends, is the end of Chapter 3 notes. Let me know if you have any questions, and don't worry, we'll be working with this information more throughout this chapter and building on it in the future. Thanks.